All right, let's jump right in. We're going to look at just one chapter in the book of Ezekiel today, but man, this chapter, it zooms in on 3 absolutely unforgettable days in the life of the prophet. And we're not talking about just any old days. These 3 days mark a massive, painful turning point for him, for his entire ministry, and for his people.
But to really get what's going on here, let me ask you something. What if you were forbidden to mourn the one person you loved most? I mean, really think about that. Imagine losing your soulmate, the absolute center of your world, and then being told, nope, you're not allowed to grieve. No tears, no funeral, nothing. That shocking, almost cruel reality, that's exactly what Ezekiel is about to face.
So, the whole thing kicks off on day 1, and it starts with this huge national crisis. It all centers around this really powerful and honestly kind of disturbing image, a boiling pot. And this pot, it's about to become a metaphor for an entire city right on the edge of total collapse. We're talking about a very specific day here, January 588 BC. This is the day the king of Babylon's army finally lays siege to Jerusalem. Now, the exiles living in Babylon, they have no idea this is happening. But God, he tells Ezekiel directly. It's this awful moment of vindication for him, you know? After all those years of warning everyone, the worst is finally here. It's like the most tragic I told you so in history.
And to explain what's happening, Ezekiel doesn't get all philosophical. He's a master of the metaphor. He uses something everyone would get, something superordinary, a cooking pot. Yeah, a simple pot. And this everyday object, it's about to become this chilling symbol of God's judgment.
Okay, so let's break this metaphor down. First, what's in the pot? Well, that's Jerusalem's elite, the best cuts of meat, so to speak, and they are trapped. Then you've got the fire underneath. That's the Babylonian army just cranking up the heat. And the final step? The scouring. The best way to think about this is like the self-clean cycle on an oven. The whole city is going to be torched to burn away all the deep-seated corruption. It's destructive, for sure, but it's also a cleansing.
But what is all this corrosion, this grime inside the pot? The text is crystal clear. It's bloodshed. The injustice and the violence in the city were so blatant, so out in the open, that Ezekiel compares it to blood spilled on a bare rock. Think about it. Blood on dirt soaks in, it can be covered up. But on a bare rock, it just sits there, a stain that can't be hidden, just crying out for judgment.
Okay, so that's day 1. Now we get to day 2, and the camera, it just zooms right in. The crisis shifts from this big national disaster to something devastatingly personal. We go from the city of Jerusalem right into Ezekiel's own home. And what he's told to do next, it is almost too cruel to even imagine. God says to him, "With one blow I am about to take away from you the delight of your eyes." The delight of his eyes, that's his wife. She's going to die. Not from some long sickness, but suddenly. Just like that. In one blow. I mean, can you imagine the shock? But believe it or not, the command that comes next is even more stunning.
Just look at this contrast. It shows you how absolutely bizarre God's instructions were. See, back then, mourning was a very public, very loud affair. You'd have wailing, weeping, people tearing their clothes, wearing special mourning outfits, friends would bring you food. It was a whole community ritual. But Ezekiel, he's told to do the exact opposite. Get dressed like it's any other day. Wear your turban, put on your sandals, and just go about your business. The only grief allowed is a silent sigh on the inside.
So you have to ask, right? His neighbors were probably whispering about it. We're certainly asking it now. Why? Why on earth would God command a man whose heart is breaking to act like nothing happened? It just seems impossibly cruel. But, as you might have guessed, there was a deeply profound prophetic reason for all of this. Here's the thing. Ezekiel himself became a living sign, a walking, talking symbol. His silent, suppressed, private grief was a sneak peek of what the entire nation was about to feel. The idea was that when the news of Jerusalem's fall finally got to them, the tragedy would be so huge, so total, losing their temple, their city, their families, that they would just be stunned into silence. It would be a grief so deep that all the normal customs, all the wailing and weeping just wouldn't apply. They'd be too shocked even for tears.
And that brings us to day 3. Now, it's important to note, this day doesn't happen immediately after day 2. It's a future event, but it's the ultimate turning point, not just for the nation, but for Ezekiel's whole ministry. It's where we finally see this pivot away from judgment and towards hope.
So let's just get the timeline straight, because it can be a little confusing.
Day 1 is when the siege of Jerusalem begins, but the city doesn't actually fall for about another 18 months. And Day 3, that happens even later. That's the day when a single survivor finally finishes the long, brutal journey to Babylon and confirms the news everyone was dreading.
And for Ezekiel personally, this day is a massive release. Think about it. For years, his entire job was to deliver messages of doom and gloom. At one point, God even symbolically struck him mute, only letting him speak words of judgment. But on this third day, when the worst has officially happened, his mouth will be opened. He's no longer silent. His job of warning people is finally over.
And this really shows the two sides of Ezekiel's role, right? On the one hand, his silent grief was a sign of judgment, showing the people the despair that was coming. But on the other hand, his newly opened mouth, that makes him a sign of grace. He's about to launch into a whole new chapter of his ministry, one that's all about restoration and hope for the future.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? After these 3 unforgettable days, what are we left with? Well, it really all comes down to this tangled relationship between 3 things: judgment, grace, and the absolutely crucial role of memory.
You know, one helpful way to think about this is to imagine 2 kinds of judgment. You've got small j judgment. Those are the natural, earthly consequences of our actions, the stuff we still have to face. But then there's capital J judgment, the ultimate final separation from God. And the whole point of grace is that you can be saved from that, even while you're still cleaning up the mess from your past.
And this is exactly why the past matters so much. See, for Ezekiel, real hope isn't about just forgetting everything, wiping the slate clean, and pretending the bad stuff never happened. No, it's about what you might call a healthy remembering. It's about looking back honestly at your failures, because that's the only solid foundation you can build a better future on.
Later on in the book, Ezekiel says it point blank. And it sounds pretty harsh, I'll admit, this idea of loathing yourselves for your past sins. But the point isn't self-hatred, not at all. It's about a deep, profound humility. It's about remembering who you were, so you can fully appreciate the grace you've been given. And it strengthens your resolve to never, ever go back there again.
So I guess that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. In our own lives, in our own stories, we so often think that hope means we have to forget the past. But what if this ancient story is right? What if it's the exact opposite? It really makes you wonder, how can remembering our most painful moments actually be the only real way to have a truly hopeful future?